Using a literary trope or a common cultural reference point for a game setting has both benefits and drawbacks. The drawbacks, of course, being that if someone does not like that particular trope or subject matter, they will pick the game up off the shelf, they'll flip it over, oh, zombies, put it back, done. I don't care, I never want to look at that again. If someone loves zombies, though, then that subject matter is doing you a benefit. It's bringing the player into the game with the knowledge they already have about the subject matter and what they expect to see. It's just up to the designer and publisher to deliver upon that promise. So, when you look at a game like Atlandice by Scott Huntington and Sean Graham, published by Ludonaut, you have certain expectations because we all are familiar with Atlantis. We know the land sinks under the ocean, and so we expect to have some sort of playing area that will disappear as the game progresses. You have to have that, otherwise why in the world would you call a game Atlantis? Or in this case, Atlandice, because now we're combining the two. We both have a land that's sinking, and we have dice involved in some manner. Oh, buried in the sand in front of this city that's going to disappear. So, how do these two topics come together? Here are the components for Atlandice, set up and ready to play in a 4-player game. With 2 or 3 players, we would remove 2 dice and 2 of each element from the various rooms. You have gems and a jeweler, you have books and a library, you have provisions, tools, and weapons, all in their various shops, and each shop is 3 levels deep. These levels will disappear over the course of the game, and your role as a citizen of Atlandice is to save as many items as you can. You want to preserve the culture of your people. We also have a black market that starts with 3 of each item in it. The active player on a round rolls the dice, places all the dice by the matching numbers. So 1's here, 2's here, everything 5. Whatever's left over goes to the black market, because if the jewelers are all gone, then the ones we placed in the black market as well. Starting with the active player, each player will take 2 dice and take an action based on where they go. So if I go over here, take a 4, if you choose where the submarine is located, then you get to take 2 of those items instead of only 1. You then take the action that shows on the space that you visited. In this case, I move the submarine. So let's move it over here so that no one else can take advantage of that. The next player may go and choose a 1 for a gem. So they put the gem in front of them, they roll the die, because if they get a 6, which they didn't, then they would roll the die again and take 1 item from whatever they roll. With the library, someone takes that, gets a book. If they roll and get a 5 or 6, no, they would take an item from any other area. With the black market, you get no special action, but you get to take whatever you want, and there's usually a bit of everything available there. So, after everyone has taken 2 dice, you're going to have 1 die left, and you look at the number of spaces that this clock hand, well, it's not really a clock, but it resembles a clock, how many spaces that clock hand will advance on the chart. So in this case, we move it ahead 1 space. Each round at Atlandice works along these lines. You roll the dice, place them, you draft, there'll be 1 die left, the clock advances, you then pass the start player marker to the next player in clockwise order, they roll the 9 dice, or 7 dice depending on the player count, and you do it again, until one of the rooms empties out. Let's say this is the situation at the start of round 4. The active player has rolled the dice and placed them. If they choose this die to take the final book out of the library, they first resolve the action of the library. I roll, I do not get a 5 or 6, so I don't get to grab something else. But then the library scores. You look and see who has the most books among all the players, and that player takes this tile, flips it over, and will score 3 points at the end of the game. Whoever has the second most number of books gets 1 point for that, and then all the books are removed from players. You refill the black market so it has 3 items again of this type, and then you place everything else in the library. You think now you're on the second floor because the water is filling up from the bottom, and now you must save more books again. Many of the special effects on the tiles allow you to move items from one area to another, or from the black market to a particular area, or to grab something extra from some other location, or to move dice around. And by doing these actions, you can affect who is leading in a particular category, and more importantly, when a particular item will score, because all that happens to trigger that is that a room gets emptied out. So if you can put more things in it, perhaps when you're in second place for whatever that particular item is, then it will take longer for that thing to score, and perhaps you'll have a chance to catch up and tie the leader. Because if you tie, then you each get 3 points for that area, and there's no second place at all. So often you're trying to fight for particular categories. You can't do everything because you're taking only 2 dice on a turn, but you can fight for what you are leading in, depending on the dice rolls, of course. You are always at the mercy of the dice. To continue with the 4th round, let's go to the next player who is currently leading in provisions. Maybe they take this die where the submarine is located, so they take 2 provisions. Then they use the special power where you take one of the dice and change it to a particular number. So now we can put this here, and if no one else chooses this particular die, well, then at least this player on the 2nd round can choose it and trigger scoring for provisions. Although perhaps this player will want to do that so that they can assure themselves of 1 point. Or this player may do it so that they can take this last thing, and now they tie for 2nd, and they will get a point as well. So they do that, they get a point, they get a point. This player takes this tile. Now the special power has changed for this particular location, and all these resources go back for the next provision room. After each round, the clock hand advances 1, 2, or 3 spaces, and initially nothing happens. But as the game progresses, you start having secondary challenges for what you are trying to collect. If we get to the end of the 4th round, where this player has the final choice, they can take either of these 2 dice. If they take this one, the clock hand advances 3 spaces, this one only 2. So you look at these special actions related to the hand. If this moves 2 spaces, then it's pointing at a book, and whoever has the most books will score 1 point. So, if a player goes to the black market, takes a book out of it, and then the clock hand advances 2, and now these 3 players each score 1 for having the most books. If the player instead chooses this die and takes a book out of here, and then moves a particular item to the black market, well, then the clock hand would move ahead 3 spaces, and you see who has the most items total, and that player will score a point. So you're looking at each of the 5 different items, in addition to who has the most provisions total, and then these spaces here, in player order, each player can return any 2 items and score a victory point, and they can do that as many times as they wish. So this player is currently leading in gems. Maybe the other people say, well, instead of getting 1 point for 2nd place, I can just return this now and get a point. And then this player can do the same. And now this player over here, this poor soul sitting on 4 gems, has a much longer road to go to actually score any points from that, since it's now filled up again. The game continues round after round, and when all 3 levels of a particular room are empty, then that item is removed from the game completely. If you have no more libraries, then you have no more books. So you're never going to score for that again. And any dice that would be placed there are instead placed in the black market. The black market always moves the hand ahead 3 spaces, so as more dice go to the black market, you increase the pace of the game, most likely, just because there's a greater chance of the final die being in the black market and moving ahead more quickly. So when that hand reaches the end of the track, you do a final scoring for all of the items that are still in the game, with the standard 3 points for whoever has the most and 1 point for whoever is in 2nd place, and then whoever has the most points wins. So I've played Atlandice 3 times on the BGG library copy that we had at Gen Con 2018, and I'll put it back in the library ahead of Gen Con BGG Con 2018 in November, so you can find it there still. I played twice with 3 players, once with 2 players, and the 3-player games did not go over great in that it felt like there was very little competition for what you're actually trying to collect, because it seemed in many cases the things that you would collect, well, those would be the dice that would be left for you to choose from, and great, I'm winning, now I just win more in this category, so big deal. Or I have to have 2 choices between things that I'm not collecting and I'm never going to score for. So there are lots of situations like that, And the iconography on the tiles seems like it should be clear. It's very pictographic. You can see what they are. You know what the provision symbol is, the symbol for an area, the symbol for the black market. You know what a die looks like. And yet I continually have to consult the rulebook to see what each of the levels does, because each level, other than the submarine stack of 3 levels, has a different power. And so I have to look through the details of it. And the powers don't seem to relate to the rooms themselves. There's not 3 effects for the library that feel library-ish in my opinion of what library effects should be. I don't know if that's valid or not, but it sort of seems like a list of effects was created and then they were kind of applied around, and you've got all these different wild effects, but there's nothing that seems coherent for the particular rooms that they're located in. Instead, it's just different powers. And you have things like the jeweler power that I showed at the beginning, where after you take that, you roll a die, and if you get a 6, then you get something. Well, the odds of you getting a 6 are pretty small, so usually it's nothing. Nothing happens. And so you're just rolling a die for nothing. I admittedly did not assist one of the playings of the game because we played on my felt tablecloth here, and so we'd roll the dice and the die would go. There was no sound. There's no excitement of dice rolling on the table. It was just, which, okay, is a bit of a drawback when you're playing a dice-based game. But the 2-player game adds a shadow neutral player. And I enjoyed that a lot more because now I'm directly competing with one other person. And I can compete more effectively in the particular items because it's just me or him. So the difference with a 2-player game is you're still rolling 7 dice. You're going to draft 3 dice on your turn. One of those dice is going to the neutral player. And whatever item would be collected goes to that neutral player. And the effect, again, is for the benefit of the neutral player if they are collecting something extra. Or, of course, if they're moving something around, which happens a lot, or changing a die or doing something like that, then you try to make it benefit you. Not neutral guy, because neutral guy can't win. It's one of the human players that's going to win. And so the 2-player setup gives a lot more competition between you, whereas in the 3-player game it seemed less competitive, even though there were more people in the game. So with the two-player version, I know it's pretty much just me or him with this sort of bucket on the side where people are throwing things in. And yes, the neutral player can win for having a majority. And you try to set that up so that they're competing against your opponent instead of you having to compete against the opponent. So you try to be effective that way, again, still being at the mercy of the dice. Additional complication was in one of our 3-player games, the clock hand kept moving ahead 3 spaces, and it was on the space where you can discard 2 items to get 1 point. And we hit that once, and one player just dumped everything for points because they were kind of 3rd place in all of it. And so the next player kind of did the same. And okay, we kept hitting that discard 2 to get an item over and over again, and it seemed to make more sense to discard things than to actually collect them and save them. So by the time the game ended, we had removed exactly 1 level from play out of the 15 possible levels that can be removed. So we didn't really feel like Atlantis. There was not much sinking going on in that particular case. And I don't know whether it's just a weird combination of players and choices and die rolls that we made, but it just came off like, this doesn't feel like Atlantis. There's nothing here. It made more sense to give stuff up. And I couldn't make sense of that in the story of how we're giving stuff up. Maybe I'm shipping it up a tube to the surface or to a different area, or attaching it to a carrier pigeon, or I don't know what it might be. So it's an overview of the game. You got sinking, you've got dice, and you got more head-to-head competition in a 2-player game as you're trying to save stuff from down below.